On today's show, the Houston Rockets trade for Jaden Springer and a future second-round draft pick in a salary dump move from the Boston Celtics. Should we be expecting any other moves, potentially something big ahead of this NBA trade deadline from the Rockets? Plus, taking a look at some of the trades around the NBA landscape and so much more. It's all coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
It's that magical time of year again. The NBA trade deadline is finally upon us. What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Thursdays. Be sure to follow along wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets, where the best way you can help us grow our show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing. Like and subscribe on YouTube. Drop us a comment while you're there. I want your thoughts on Jaden Springer. How do you feel about the Rockets picking him up? We're going to talk about him in just a minute. And do you want to see the Rockets do anything else ahead of the NBA trade deadline? What are your predictions? Let me know in the comments, or just do a drive-by. Say go Rockets. Helps us out a ton. Also, subscribe to the daily Locked On Rockets newsletter. Would sincerely appreciate that. We got a lot of trades to talk about on today's show and expectations for the Rockets in the waning hours of the NBA trade deadline. First, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head on over to FanDuel.com to get started. And as always, thanks so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym, as you're sweating it out ahead of the NBA trade deadline. Thanks so much for being an everydayer. Let's start with the one move that the Rockets have made so far, and that's trading for Boston Celtics combo guard Jaden Springer and a 2030 second round pick. So as this was originally reported, the Rockets are basically sending a super duper heavily protected second round pick to the Boston Celtics. I apologize. Both teams are swapping heavily protected second round picks, and then the Celtics are essentially paying the part of the trade that actually matters, where Houston is getting value, is they're getting Jaden Springer and their the Celtics, that is 2030 second round pick. So first off, I want to highlight here, this is a fantastic trade by the Rockets front office and general manager Rafael Stone. This is exactly one of those moves. God, I was part of the asset management mob for a minute there on Twitter, and this is exactly one of those moves that asset management Twitter should love, because this is a move at the margins where, yeah, look, Jaden Springer is not going to be the move that puts you over the top if you're this Rockets team. We'll talk about Jaden Springer, the player, here in just a moment, but it's a great move. The Rockets had an open roster spot. There's a bunch of teams around the NBA landscape that have been looking to shed some salary, essentially. And, you know, basically, I mean, a bunch of these names have already been on the move, whether it's PJ Tucker, Daniel Tice was another one, Jaden Springer is one. There are a bunch of contracts around the league of teams that would have loved or would love still to, you know, basically duck the tax a little bit. And that's what this trade allows the Boston Celtics to do, right? It's a salary saving move for the Celtics. And the Rockets get to be the beneficiaries of that. They had the open extra roster spot. They also recoup an additional second round pick down the line. And the Rockets are still in a great position. They're still below the luxury tax threshold. And they still have their MLE to work with if they wanted to absorb a player into that or make a move using that. And there's still other things that they could potentially accomplish ahead of the NBA trade deadline. It's also worth noting here that this trade is not finalized yet. It hasn't hit the NBA wire. So with that being said, at the time of this recording, there's a chance that the Rockets may expand this trade because it hasn't been submitted and it's not official by, you know, league channels or anything. It's just, we're just going off the Shams Charania report. You know, there's options for the Rockets to potentially add to this trade, or maybe it's, you know, not in its finalized form yet. Maybe there's more to be done or whatever. So at this point, though, I think it's a really smart move. It's a savvy move by the Rockets front office. And to be able to pick up a player like Jaden Springer, who has still a pretty tremendous amount of upside. He's still really, really young, only 22 years old. He's played less than 100 games in his NBA career so far to this point. 93 games total. He started 4 of those games. Look, he's a defensive demon. He very much has shades. His NBA draft comp coming out was of Marcus Smart. And you see that at times, right? Like you see a lot of shades of Marcus Smart in his game. The way they both are like defensive hounds. Sorry, that was unintentional, I promise. But they get after it defensively. They're not the most athletic players in the world, but they make up for it by their use of, high basketball IQ, great motors, kind of utilizing angles and stuff, especially on the defensive end, right? Being physical, and then neither able to shoot a lick, right? Jaden Springer in his entire NBA career has only made, what is it? Something ridiculous. Where's his totals at? 3-point makes, in his entire NBA career, he's only made 8 3-pointers. Right? Is that correct? Or am I way off? Oh no, I'm way off on this. What? It's this season that he's only made 6 3-pointers. There we go. Sorry. The math on that was not mathing. I was like, wait, that's definitely not right. In his entire career, he's made 18 3-pointers. There we go. Now the math is correct. Look, it's a great, incredibly low risk, potentially high reward move. Obviously Ime Udoka was incredibly fond of Marcus Smart during his season in Boston. And Jaden Springer is basically a young, incredibly raw Marcus Smart. Now, do I expect Jaden Springer to be thrown into the Rockets rotation? Do I think he's going to get, at rotation? Probably more than likely not, right? But this is a guy that is probably going to be really good to have around in practice, a guy that's going to potentially be somebody that they can turn to in moments where they need a really strong defensive guard presence out there on the floor. And again, at about 6'4", he's kind of a combo guard. He probably skews a little bit better towards guarding twos and maybe even being a bit of an undersized wing than true, quick twitch, small point guards, especially with his a little bit of a lack of athleticism at times. He doesn't quite have like the quick twitch burst that some other guards do. But he makes up for it by being just a tough, gritty defender. Again, very aware of very great, just great situational awareness, great hands. Again, I really like Jaden Springer. I think that he's a good pickup in the sense that you got him for absolutely nothing. And at worst case scenario, he turns out to be like a defensive specialist in his NBA career. So TBD on whether or not the Rockets ultimately add more to this deal, or if they turn around and do anything else. And that's kind of the really interesting part is, are the Rockets going to just stand pat at this NBA trade deadline? Are they working on some deals behind the scenes? What should the expectations for this team be as we go into the final hours of the NBA trade deadline? We'll talk about that coming up here in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Basketball season is in full swing, and there's no better way to get in on the action than with Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With over 10 million members and billions in awarded winnings, Prize Picks makes it easy and fun to turn your sports knowledge into real money. Here's how it works. Just pick more or less on at least 2 players' projections, and if you're right, you could win up to 1,000 times your cash. Prize Picks even has a free pick for the big game where Patrick Mahomes only needs to throw 1 yard to win. Pair that with one more correct pick and you are cashing out. This week, I'm looking at the board and selecting more for Jalen Green on points and more for Alperen Sengun on rebounds. The best part, Prize Picks keeps it simple. You can set your lineup in less than 60 seconds, and their fast, secure withdrawals mean you get paid quickly when you win. Plus, their Taco Tuesday promo gives you discounted player projections for even more value. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNBA for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, look, the big rumor swirling around this Houston Rockets team ahead of the NBA trade deadline, or I guess pair of rumors, was their reported interest from a couple different outlets, as well as me doing a little bit of my own digging, in the fact that the Rockets were absolutely, and have been for a minute now, kind of kicking the tires on the Kevin Durant situation in Phoenix. Now, all signs right now are pointing towards the fact that the Rockets are probably not going to do anything, that the Phoenix Suns are going to sit there and just try to run it back with this exact same roster post NBA trade deadline, which is about as ridiculous as things can get, right? They spent the entire season trying to trade Bradley Beal for Jimmy Butler. They completely whiffed on that after trying to, do so many different variations of this trade, 3-team deals, 4-team deals, whatever. It all fell through. And then as an act of desperation, they were like, okay, well, what if we potentially trade KD for Jimmy Butler, and we get like a Butler package plus a bunch of, young guys and some future picks. And then we get to kind of straddle the fence, right? We can be competitive now with Jimmy Butler in place of Kevin Durant, and we can gear up for the future, the post KD/Jimmy era. And whenever we're finally off the hook from this horrendous Bradley Beal contract, and they've whiffed out on that too. So the Suns are now sitting in a position where all the messaging that they're sending out is like, we're not doing anything, and we just hope that everybody plays better post-trade deadline, which is just an awful state to be, like an awful place to be if you're a Suns fan, and some really awful work by their front office. But the Rockets were absolutely and continue to be kind of, they've monitored this KD situation very, very closely. And it would not shock me. First off, I don't think, I'll be right for here from the jump, I don't think we're going to see anything else. I don't think we're going to see any crazy swings or any big moves by the Rockets. And if we do see anything else, I feel like it's going to be something incredibly small, like an at the margins move, using some of the other expiring salary potentially on the roster. Or again, another consolidation move, or something where a team pays the Rockets some assets in order to take on some salary, or so that another team can shed some salary and Houston takes it on, that kind of thing. There's been, reports that the Rockets are looking to utilize Jock Landale's contract for exactly a situation like that. So be on the lookout for something like that. But I don't think we're going to see a big swing at this trade deadline. And I don't know if that's, as I sit here recording this podcast, I'm torn on whether that's a mistake or if it's the right move. Because, and I will say, it also wouldn't surprise me with as helter-skelter and chaotic as this NBA trade deadline has been. This is truly like a historic NBA trade deadline with so many different star players changing teams. It wouldn't shock me if the Phoenix Suns turned around after all their posturing, all their, we're not doing this and we're keeping KD, and it would not shock me if Phoenix turned around and still dealt KD. And it wouldn't surprise me if the Rockets were on the receiving end of a Kevin Durant deal at this point. The Rockets have shown throughout this season that they're capable of being a top team in the NBA, that they're capable of competing with the best in the NBA. They've also shown a distinct inability to close out games, specifically on the offensive end. Defensively, in a number of these collapses that the Rockets have had, defense hasn't been the issue. It's been a problem a couple times, but by and large, the issues, the late game issues, the crunch time games, the clutch games that the Houston Rockets have lost this season have been due to their inability to have a go-to reliable option down the stretch of games. Tell you what Kevin Durant absolutely is. That is a go-to reliable offensive option, literally one of, if not maybe the greatest offensive player to have ever played the game of basketball. And if the Rockets could get KD without giving up all of the treasure trove of Phoenix Suns assets that they currently own, I think it makes a ton of sense. I think there's a lot of different trade hypotheticals out there that you could potentially entertain. Shout out to David Weiner, Rockets Twitter legend and Clutch Fans forum legend, at BMathug on Twitter, who posted this trade hypothetical of I guess this trade hypothetical, never mind, this trade hypothetical is busted now because this was a Jimmy Butler version of it. But essentially, it was a version of this trade where the Rockets gave up Jabari Smith Jr., Steven Adams, Jeff Green, Reed Sheppard, and that was it. They didn't even include Cam Whitmore, and they walked away with Kevin Durant. Like, if the cost is that minimal, if the cost is essentially something like Jabari and one of like Reed or Cam and one of those Phoenix picks or one or two of those Phoenix picks, then I find it really hard to say don't just absolutely go for it. I've said this before on the show. Opportunity is not a lengthy visitor, and I understand the desire for long-term competitiveness, and I don't think you want to mortgage your entire future for a chance at a title this season or a short, 2, maybe 3-year window if you did go for a Kevin Durant trade. But at the same time, KD is a guy that should theoretically be able to age pretty gracefully, and as long as you start to wean him off of the need for him to be your de facto number one scoring option, he's a guy that should be able to age into the twilight of his career, similar to LeBron James, where he can still take over games when he needs to, but you have other guys try and do the heavy lifting, over the course of a grueling 82-game season. And the more that I go back and forth and think about it, I'm torn because the Rockets kind of hold all the cards here. At least they hold the future, literally the future of the Phoenix Suns, who, by the way, the Suns traded their 2031 unprotected first-round draft pick in order to get 3 crappy firsts back from the Utah Jazz in order to try and facilitate some kind of a deal ahead of this NBA trade deadline. And that's looking like an awful trade as well. So the Suns front office is just conducting an absolute disaster class on how to try and make moves around the margins to flesh out a contender at this point, or a very flawed contender, I might add. So I don't know. The argument here is, do you make a trade for Kevin Durant, even if the Suns are signaling that they're not willing to move on from KD at this point? Maybe that's all just smoke and mirrors. Maybe they're still listening to offers behind closed doors, whatever. But do you make a move to try and get Kevin Durant right now? Or do you hold off and try to go for Devin Booker this offseason or maybe next trade deadline, assuming things blow up spectacularly in Phoenix? I'm torn because I think this Rockets team, as presently constructed, if you added KD to this team and essentially you're swapping out Jabari and, one of, or maybe both of, I don't know, like Reed and Cam or something like that, and then just salary filler plus, some of the, 1 or 2 of the Phoenix picks going back to them, versus this offseason and having to do a combo package, a deal probably centered around Jalen, and then one of still Cam or Reed, and then like all of the future Phoenix picks. I don't know. I don't know which one makes more sense, whether this team would be better in the long term, better in the here and now and better in the long term with Kevin Durant or Devin Booker. And that's where I kind of go back and forth. And I think at this point, after talking myself into Devin Booker as the goal, the pursuit for the Rockets, and a lot of the reporting has suggested that, right, that the Rockets are only interested in making a move at this deadline if Devin Booker is to be available, and all the posturing from Phoenix is that Devin Booker is the one untouchable on the roster. If that's the case, then I don't expect there to be any movement, but it's hard not to imagine this Rockets roster with Kevin Durant immediately becoming legitimate contenders for the foreseeable future. And the ceiling of this team changes drastically with a Kevin Durant addition. You might be mortgaging the future just a little bit, but I don't think it's necessarily short-sighted, especially because you'd still have, if you're keeping the majority of the young core together, if you're keeping Jalen, if you're keeping Sengun, as long as you're keeping them in, keeping Tari, Eason, hell, maybe there's a version of this trade where you could still keep Jabari Smith Jr. I don't know. As long as you're keeping most of the young core intact, that young core will grow and blossom and kind of come into their own as KD is kind of fading out, and be able to take on more and more of the heavy lifting throughout the regular season, and even throughout an individual 48-minute game, to where KD doesn't need to be your alpha number one scoring option for all 48 minutes. He can just step up when he needs to at the end of a game. At least theoretically, that's how I kind of view this thing on paper. Again, expectations though, I don't think anything happens. I'm doing all this pontificating and speculating, and I feel like we're just going to be headed for a very quiet trade deadline in Houston, with one more caveat of the Rockets do have, again, some expiring salaries. They've got some team-friendly contracts that they could move on from. You look at Jeff Green as an option. You look at Jock Landale as another one. They really love Jeff Green in the Rockets locker room. He's very much almost like having another coach on the roster. And so I really think it's probably just they're looking at moving Jock Landale. If they can get something of value back for Jock Landale, then maybe they swing that. The only other deal that maybe happens if the Rockets are able to swing it would be a Rob Williams trade, potentially. I could see them maybe trying to make a deal for Rob Williams still. And hell, maybe Jaden Springer is a piece that gets rerouted to the Portland Trailblazers in a Rob Williams trade, right? Young, enticing, defensive-minded prospect. You include, a piece of draft capital moving forward. It seems like the teams that would have been vying for Rob Williams no longer need him. Case in point, the Lakers, who secured their big man of the future in Mark Williams. Talk about that in a minute. I don't know. It seems like the Blazers are either going to be stuck with holding on to Rob Williams past the trade deadline, or maybe if the reported interest is true and if the Rockets do want to swing a move, then if they can get it done for a cheap first round pick or maybe a handful of second round picks, then maybe that's the deal that we see ahead of the trade deadline. What do you want to see the Rockets do ahead of the NBA trade deadline? How do you feel about the Jaden Springer trade? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Coming up, I want to talk about some of the trades that we've seen around the NBA landscape and more. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here. One game, two teams, endless possibilities, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field. And the app is so easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that's the icing on the cake. Download the app or head on over to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right. I do want to continue one more thought, kind of building upon last segment before I take a quick trip around the NBA and react to some of the other trades going on. But some of where I think the desire for me personally, and for many other Rockets fans, comes from this team to make what doesn't feel like, I guess, an all-in move going for, an established star-level talent like a Kevin Durant, but to make a move like that, to make a truly needle-moving transaction. Where that comes from is looking at the landscape of the NBA, right? Looking at the Warriors trying to go all in on their new big three of Jimmy Butler, Steph Curry, and Draymond Green. And they kept a lot of their other pieces that have, been able to make them competitive this season. And we've seen the Warriors win some big games this year. So Jimmy Butler is absolutely going to help them out. The Warriors could be deadly. The Sacramento Kings have made some moves. They got Zach LaVine. They got Jonas Valanciunas. They also got absolutely mollywopped in their first game with Zach LaVine in the lineup by the Orlando Magic, 130-111. The Magic were leading by 30 at one point. So this could just be the Kings doing the most Kangs thing ever and trying to form some weird pseudo-competitive team of a bunch of not fringe guys, but whatever. Island of misfit toys kind of situation that, nobody else wants. Who knows? But it's just seeing other teams make these moves. And then the biggest move of all to me is the Lakers. They succeeded. I was worried about the Lakers. I was worried about their roster construction. I really thought that they'd have to think about positioning themselves for the future, rather than trying to win this season. But it looks like they're trying to win this season, they swung a big deal for Mark Williams from the Charlotte Hornets, trading Dalton Knecht, Cam Reddish, and a 2031 unprotected first and a 2030 pick swap to the Hornets to secure their big man of the future. And look, I like Mark Williams a lot. I think he does have some shortcomings as a player. He's battled some injury issues, but never needed surgery. He is exactly what this Lakers team needed. They needed a massive big to be able to funnel everything to defensively, because LeBron, Luka, Austin Reeves, those are not great perimeter defenders. You were never going to have a great perimeter defense with those three guys being in your starting lineup. So what's the alternative? You find a big who can clean up all their mistakes. You find a big that you can funnel everything to defensively, and then that becomes your entire defensive game plan with Mark Williams on the floor. And then offensively, he is where's my button? Do I have the button available? There he is.
Lob threat.
He's a lob threat. He complements Luka and LeBron perfectly. So the Lakers are suddenly really dangerous. Like, actually, they have a dangerous starting lineup of Austin Reeves, Luka, LeBron, Rui Hachimura, and Mark Williams. And they've got a great set of role players coming in off the bench. They've got Dorian Finney-Smith. They've got Maxi Kleba, Jared Vanderbilt, Gabe Vincent still on the roster, right? Like, I'm trying to think. I'm making sure I'm not missing any names. Jackson Hayes still as a backup five. Like, they've got a bunch of pieces. And so suddenly the Lakers go from being a team that had a bunch of question marks heading into this trade deadline into a team that the Rockets have to legitimately worry about as competition in this Western Conference. The Nuggets are still lethal with Jokic, even though they've had a down season, and they might make a move ahead of the trade deadline. The Clippers got Kawhi Leonard back. Like, nothing is for certain with the state of this Western Conference right now. And it feels like the Houston Rockets riding this current 4-game losing streak and losing some very disappointing games to the Nets and some really close games that they could have potentially won against the Grizzlies and the Knicks. It feels like the Rockets are very close to sliding from being at the top of the Western Conference. Look, they're just a few games away from being in the 6th seed, right? The Rockets have 18 losses right now. The Clippers are the 6th seed. They have 22 losses. The Suns are all the way down. Sorry, let me go. The Mavericks are down at the 8th seed, but in like a weird 3-4-way tie. The Mavs, the Kings, the Suns, and the Warriors all have 25 losses. And that's 8 through 11 right there in the West. The Rockets are only a handful of losses. They're only like one more bad losing streak away from falling out of the top end of the playoff bracket as we speak. So I don't know. Is everything just house money this season? And are the Rockets willing to forego having been one of the top teams and experience the turbulence of a young team and, plummet in the standings and just take whatever they can get at the end of the season? And, we get one playoff run, one first round appearance. We don't care if we get home court advantage. I don't know. The posturing for the Rockets has been, they're willing to be patient. They're willing to see this young core grow. They want to see what this young core can bring to the table. But I feel like I'd like to see them make a move, especially if a move is available. I don't want to see them make a move just for making a move's sake, but I want to see them, if somebody is available, if a Kevin Durant is available, I want them to do it. I mentioned the Lakers deal, and it's the Lakers, so of course they find a way to get, everything they want ahead of the trade deadline. They might not be done wheeling and dealing. We could still see the Lakers make another move or two ahead of the deadline, although they're in a much, much better spot now for the rest of the season than I thought they would ultimately be able to get into. I thought Clint Capella was headed to LA for sure. The writing's been on the wall for Clint Capella for a minute now. In Atlanta, especially with Onyeka Okongwu taking over the starting position from Clint Capella earlier this season. So I really thought that was going to be the big man heading out to LA to complement Luka and LeBron. Elsewhere, some of the other moves, and we'll do a state of the NBA kind of. We'll evaluate everything post trade deadline, because I'm sure we'll get a few more deals in here before things are all said and done. The New Orleans Pelicans moving Brandon Ingram to the Toronto Raptors is kind of a weird trade for the Raptors. I don't know why they gave up. I guess it's because Toronto feels like they can't get a player of Ingram's caliber in free agency to come to Toronto, so they just felt like they had a deal for him. But now they're going to have to pay him a ton of money this offseason to keep him in Toronto, and he's an unrestricted free agent, which means he can go anywhere. So that move, I think, kind of sucks for Toronto. And then elsewhere in the Western Conference, not really any other moves, I guess, but just I think that in watching the De'Aaron Fox debut with the San Antonio Spurs, my goodness, the Spurs are going to be, I think the Spurs are going to make a push for the playoffs this season. Like Fox and Wemby, that's going to be the real deal. And Fox was incredible in his debut. So, and it's funny is y'all flamed me so hard for this idea earlier this season, but the Spurs are doing exactly what I suggested the Rockets potentially do in a De'Aaron Fox deal, which is they have a starting backcourt right now of Chris Paul and De'Aaron Fox. And I threw out there that if the Rockets did make a Fox deal, they could have a starting backcourt of Fred VanVleet, De'Aaron Fox. And it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, as at least a temporary holdover while they figure out what the long-term look of the team would be. And so it's funny to see the Spurs front office make that exact same move and the coaching staff make that exact same decision. So it validates me just a little bit. Although I was weaning myself off of the idea of De'Aaron Fox as the season went on. I just, especially with how Jalen Green has played as of late, it's been really nice to see him kind of rounding into form. Although the last 10 games have not been the best from Jalen Green. The true shooting has kind of plummeted once again. He's down to like 51% true shooting. So that plus the turnovers in the games without Fred VanVleet have been a little brutal to witness. So we'll see. We'll see if we're in for another roller coaster dip or if he can kind of stabilize his play moving forward. Because the whole team has been struggling over these last like 4 or 5 games or so. So it's not just a Jalen Green issue. Anyways, I think that's what I've got. I don't think I'm missing any other substantial deals unless I just completely glazed over one. Yeah, I think I guess the Kuzma deal, Milwaukee Bucks big 3. But again, I'm going to do a full recap of the trade deadline after it's done. This was all just kind of speculative in nature coming into the deadline and what we thought some other teams were going to potentially do. I'd keep my eyes on the Timberwolves, though. I feel like the T-Wolves are going to deal Julius Randle. That situation is not working out for them, and I feel like they need a significant move to be able to make things work this season. So that's my other team to keep an eye out for. But will the Rockets make any other deals ahead of the trade deadline? Will they do another move at the margins? Will they go after tertiary big like Rob Williams, or will we see them completely swing for the fences against all the reported rumors and whatnot, and make a deal for somebody like a Kevin Durant? Drop your thoughts in the YouTube comments. Remember, the best way you can help us grow our show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing. Like and subscribe on YouTube. Drop the comments while you're there. Subscribe to the daily Locked On Rockets newsletter. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you on the other side of the NBA trade deadline, and we also look forward to having you back for that next episode of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.